is the first of a two-part presentation telling the USS Indianapolis story. This program and part two are being brought to you by the USS Indianapolis Legacy Organization and was created by the Legacy Education Committee. Our purpose is to tell and preserve the Indy story in a format suitable to reach our Indy families, friends, and those interested in learning about the USS Indianapolis CA-35. Part two will be broadcast in 2 weeks on Thursday, March 18th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Time. Please jot that down now and mark your calendar. You don't want to miss that. It's a fantastic group of speakers that we have lined up for that one as well. But tonight we're bringing you part one, Never Give Up. The USS Indianapolis Part 1 covers the history of the ship from the construction and launching until that fateful and tragic night in July 1945. We talk about the pre-war period, the beginning of World War II, and the battles during that war, and the USS Indianapolis and crew that were a part of much of World War II. You will hear told from an amazing group of speakers, and I do mean amazing, all with close ties to the history of the USS Indianapolis. So let me introduce our speakers for tonight. I decided the best way probably to do this would be alphabetically, so you guys have a clue who's coming up. And it starts with me, Belcher, Jim Belcher Jr. I'm the son of survivor James Belcher, striker radioman. Dad retired from the Navy in July of '69, so he stayed in for 3 wars. Ironically, my mother's Japanese and also a survivor of World War II. I'm an honorary survivor. I'm retired and I live in Virginia. Joining us also tonight as a presenter is Michael Emery. Michael, can you give us a little wave? There we go, acknowledgement. He's the nephew of lost at sea crewman William Emery, Navigation Division. Michael is an educator, an honorary survivor of the USS Indianapolis, and he resides in Massachusetts. Next, we have Earl Henry Jr. Earl, son of lost at sea officer Lieutenant Commander Earl O. Henry, the ship's dentist. Earl, too, is an honorary survivor, is retired from the banking industry, travels and educates on the USS Indianapolis story, and lives in Tennessee. Next, we have Sara Vladic. Sara? There you go. Sara is a USS Indianapolis historian. She's a movie maker. She did the USS Indianapolis, the Legacy documentary, along with Melanie Johnson. She's co-author of the book USS Indianapolis, released in 2017, is that right?
2018.
And an honorary USS Indianapolis survivor. And last, but most importantly, of course, we have our survivor, Dick Thelen. And Dick will be, Dick's up. Dick, you give us a wave. There we go. Dick is one of 7 living survivors that we have with the USS Indianapolis. He's been a dear friend of the organization since the very beginning. He was there at the first reunion, and he has been to all the reunions, save for one, my understanding. And Dick is a treat. I'm so glad we have him here to speak with us tonight and to answer some questions at the end. Dick lives in Michigan, and we're just glad to have him. So with that, I think we're ready to begin the program, and I need to turn this part of the program over to Sara.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon and evening, depending on where you are. And I want to take a step back because most people know the story of Indianapolis because of her sinking, but she was an incredible ship with a storied history with so many accomplishments, and she really was the pride of the Navy. And so going back to 1932, when she was first built and then commissioned, she was actually chosen by Franklin Roosevelt as his ship of state. She was the first ship to take an acting president out of the country, and she served for dignitaries for very important meetings with the president, with naval leadership to come aboard there, and it was a privilege to be aboard Indianapolis. And so she even went on the Good Neighbor tour, which took Roosevelt to South America, where he, met with dignitaries and just was able to build that relationship with South America. From there, Indy service, she served as the flagship for the commander of Scouting Force 1, all the way through peacetime up until Pearl Harbor. And on that fateful day, December 7th, 1941, she was actually away from Pearl. And she was at Johnson Island, not that far away from Pearl Harbor, when the news came in. And she rushed to Pearl Harbor, and many of the crew members who were there at that time witnessed, the tragedy that happened. They had just been there a couple days before, and so seeing the devastation really affected them. And so Indianapolis went out to join the fight. She was there through what would be 10 major campaigns where she earned the battle stars, and I'll kind of go into that in a moment, but she really was this incredible ship that served as a leadership, and it was because she had such speed. She was a 610-foot long ship, and very fast, she was armored. She was, really a choice ship when it came to Admiral Spruant's choosing. And Admiral Spruant served several tours aboard her, and that's why she was chosen as his flagship for the Fifth Fleet, where Spruance came aboard and commanded many of the battles of the Pacific we all know about, like Okinawa and Iwo Jima. And really, what's missed here is the fact that, you hear Marianas, you hear Tinian, you hear the Great Turkey Shoot, you hear all these battles, but we don't associate Indianapolis with that. We associate it with carrying, a top secret cargo later. But her role was right there, earning back the Pacific after it was essentially kind of taken away for Pearl Harbor. That's what, American perspective was, that we were attacked and were surprise attacked. And so Indianapolis was integral in that role to earn back those islands and to bring us closer to the invasion of Japan. Now, all the way up until 1944, she had earned 7 of those battle stars. And in that summer, that's when I believe, Earl Henry, that's when your father went aboard, correct?
That's correct.
And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, my father had been practicing dentistry in Knoxville, Tennessee. And for some reason, he joined the Naval Reserves in the middle of 1941. Maybe it was because he could tell that we were very likely going to be in war. He was called to active duty sometime after December 7th. He was one of 25 dentists that reported to the Marine Training Base at Parris Island, South Carolina on the same day, February 15th of 1942. He served there for a year as a Navy dentist, and then he was transferred to the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, again to serve as a dentist. He was there for approximately 14 months. He thought he should take his turn at sea, and so he volunteered for sea duty. He was assigned to the USS Indianapolis CA-35, which was considered a choice assignment. To get to the ship, he left Southern California on the USS Altamaha as far as Pearl Harbor. And from there, he was on 4 other ships, but each place they would go, the Indianapolis would have just left. He finally caught up with the Indianapolis at Saipan on July 25th of 1944. Sarah?
And I understand the Indianapolis would earn 1 more battle star that fall in 1944, and that was soon before the command changed, and the final captain of Indianapolis came aboard, and that was Captain Charles McVay III. Prior to that, there were 9 other captains, but McVay would be the final captain to command Indianapolis. So that happened in 1944, and McVay was really a rising star in the Navy. He was from a prestigious family, a naval family rich in naval history. He had commanded other ships. He had served on a task force, and he was, shooting for admiral at this point. So he, it wasn't a surprise to those who knew him that he would earn the place as commander of Indianapolis. And then shortly after McVay came aboard in November, Indianapolis set out on the next tour in January of 1945, and that's when Admiral Spruance came back aboard the ship for another tour, and they headed over to Iwo Jima first, where they helped with the bombardment and preparing for troops to invade Iwo Jima. And then they had several campaigns bombing Tokyo, and then she would go on to Okinawa. Now, Okinawa is where things changed a bit. Now, she earned 10 battle stars. Okinawa was the 9th. I'm sorry, Iwo Jima was the 9th. Okinawa would be the 10th. But it was not the Battle of Okinawa that she received the battle star for. It was for the preparation and the bombardment, preparing for the invasion. She actually never got to participate in the invasion of Okinawa because on the day before, in the early morning hours, a Japanese kamikaze, a suicide plane, came out of the sky, came right from the sun angle, so the men couldn't see her and fire upon her fast enough. And she clipped her wing on one of the whale boats on there, and it loosened one of the bombs that went through the main deck and several decks and exploded underneath the ship. And this killed 9 men, injured, I believe, 26, and really changed the course of history for Indianapolis. Now, Earl, your father was aboard that ship, and I'm sure through letters that he wrote to your mother told some stories and about his, that experience. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that from his point of view?
Well, yes. As the ship's dentist, my father was responsible for maintaining the dental records of all the crew. And that meant that any new crewman he met, he probably met more members of the crew than almost, there would have been only a few other people who would have met as many members of the crew as my dad. With these dental records, what he told my mother was that he had to identify those 9 sailors who died from the Kamikaze Attack using dental records. And I've seen a lot of photos in the books, and we're looking at some of them right now on the screen, honoring those 9 men who died from the Kamikaze Attack. And so I wonder what my father's thoughts were. As I see those photos, I wonder, where was my father? There are other photos that show a lot of the crew around the ceremony. But so I wonder what he thought about that. So Sarah?
Yeah, I know that a lot of people were very rattled by the Kamikaze Attack, of course. Indy had always been considered a lucky ship, and that changed a bit after that. So, the men went home. The ship actually required extensive repair. It limped to a little island called Karamaretto, where they patched it up, and then it was sent back to the States. And in the States, or on the way to the States, it had a very severe list. So a lot of men said it was really hard to stand on the deck when they were going back. They're also going back much slower than they're usually traveling at. And they had no fresh water because the boilers were out because of the attack. And so imagine taking saltwater showers for days in the Pacific in this, pretty hot weather. So that part doesn't, seem all that fun to me. A lot of things that our servicemen and women go through seem kind of challenging, but that seems extra hard. So tight quarters, and they're headed back with the list, and they're going back to the States now. They can't do repairs fully in Karamaretto or Guam or anything out in the Pacific, so they send the ship back to the United States to Mare Island, which is about 30 miles north of San Francisco. And during this time, a lot is happening in the world. FDR passed away. Truman is made president. Hitler committed suicide. they arrived very early May 3rd. And so this is just days before VE Day when Germany surrendered. And there's a lot of emotions surrounding this. And there's a lot of things changing with the ship too. A lot of the old hands left and a lot of the new hands came aboard. And a lot of people went on leave for the first time in months since they'd been in the States back in December. So I kind of want to take a moment here to talk to each of our panelists and have them tell us about their loved one's experience, or in Dick's case, his own experience with coming aboard the ship in May of 1945. So I'm gonna start with Earl, since his father was on the longest, and then Earl, I'll have you toss it to the next person.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Well, the Indianapolis returned to Mare Island facing several weeks of needed repairs, gave my father an opportunity to take a 3-week leave. He traveled to where my mother was. She was staying with her parents while my dad was at sea. That was Mayfield, Kentucky. And he did not want my mother to travel because she was pregnant with me. And for 3 weeks, they had a wonderful time with friends and family. My father's parents from Knoxville, Tennessee, spent a week in Mayfield. And when the leave was just about over, my mother and dad drove to Memphis, Tennessee. And the primary purpose was to evaluate the dental facilities at Millington Naval Air Station, because my father was thinking about where would he request duty once the war was over, but before he would actually be discharged from the Navy. And that was the nearest naval center to either Knoxville, his home, or Mayfield, Kentucky, where my mother was. And that night, they went to dinner on the roof of the Peabody Hotel in Memphis. It was their last night out as a couple. And it was just 2 or 3 days after that my father had to leave to return to Mare Island. And when he arrived at Mare Island, he had a telegram announcing that he was a father, that I had been born 6 weeks prematurely. I was not expecting until about the time that the ship was sunk. But let me turn now to Jim and let him tell about his dad.
Thank you, Earl. Yeah, my dad was brand new. He went in the Navy at age 17 and washed out purposely of aviator training program at Emery University. And then he reported to radio school. They put him in radioman school. He finished radioman school and left for Camp Shoemaker in California, where they did ship assignments. And that's where he and a few of the other radio men from his radio class were assigned their ships. And by chance, he and John Cassidy were 2 from Dad's radio class that got assigned to the Indianapolis. So John and Dad showed up sometime in early to mid-June of 45, just a month or so before the ship pulled out. Dad was reported to the Radio Shack, and his job, he said, essentially as a Seaman First Class radioman striker, was gopher, which basically translates to go for this and go for that. So he was learning the crew, and of course, big ship. He was from Abbeville, Alabama, and for him, it was overwhelming, the number of people on this ship. And there was, by chance, one other boy from his hometown of Abbeville on the ship who did not make it. But Dad was happy to be there, and he was learning the radio trade. And as it was, he ended up retiring from the Navy as a radioman. So this was his start. What a start, huh? With that, I'd like to turn it over to Michael. Michael, I know you've got a story to share with your uncle.
I sure do. Thank you, Brother Jim. First of all, greetings of love to my Indy family and my fellow Indy Gold Star Lost at Sea family members. I'm honored and I'm humbled to be with you all today to share my uncle and namesake's fateful military journey that led William Friend Emery to be a part of the final sailing crew of the USS Indianapolis CA-35. Upon graduation from Newcomb, Connecticut High School in May 1944, Bill Emery entered the United States Navy Reserve as an apprentice seaman at the Navy Recruiting Station in New Haven, Connecticut. On July 14th, Bill Emery reported for active duty at the Navy Training Station in Sampson, New York. Now, prior to completion of this training, Bill Emery was offered an appointment to officer training in the Navy V6 program, but he declined in order to remain with his buddies at Sampson. Now, Bill Emery's middle name is Friend, and that's really symbolic and representative of his decision to remain with his buddies at Sampson. Upon completion of basic training, Bill Emery's ability and his good record were recognized and was ordered for further training at the Quartermaster School at the Naval Training Center in Bainbridge, Maryland. Uncle Bill was the only member of his company at Sampson to be selected for quartermaster instruction. Now, Bill Emery's assignment for active duty was delayed several months due to serious illness. Now, during this time, Bill Emery's father, Lieutenant Commander John Colvin Emery, received a high-level strict order to place his son on a ship that had the least likelihood of seeing any action. Now, this order came from above. It was his wife, my grandmother, Janet Miller Emery. Now, the reason for my grandmother's overprotection was due to losing her youngest child 5 years earlier. My uncle, Stephen Gray Emery, died of spinal meningitis in 1940. Stephen was only 5 years old. Now, my grandfather was based in the Navy in Mill Valley, California during the war. He found a ship at Mare Island in Vallejo that was in dry dock after getting damaged by a kamikaze during the Okinawa gunter operation. Now, Vallejo was only 35 minutes from Mill Valley, so Uncle Bill could come home for weekend liberties. And the ship's name, of course, was the USS Indianapolis CA-35. William Friend Emery, Seaman First Class, Quartermaster Striker, Navigation Division, reported for active duty aboard the Indianapolis on May 8, 1945. Now, 4 days later, on May 12th, survivor Dick Thelen went aboard the Indy. Now, Dick, why don't you tell us a little bit about your memories about being part of the new crew aboard the USS Indianapolis?
Dick, where are you?
He might be on mute.
Oh,
He is on mute.
hold on one moment, Dick. We're gonna see if I can.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead, now?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I'm one of the new crew members, but it was on the Indianapolis. I was in only 18 years in March, and this ship went down in July. I was 18 years and 4 months. My father had to sign for me to go in the Navy at 17. There I commanded in May 8th, I think he was telling me. And from there, I had easy duty. They sent me to firefighter school and 20 millimeter school for a week or two. Then on the ship, it was dry dock. So every civilian welder had to have a Navy personnel man to go with them. That's Navy regulation. So I went with this man for about 6 weeks, day and day. It was real good duty. Anyhow, the ship was, got my dry dock, and then we went down to Hunters Point, and we, of course, we loaded the Tommy bomb, and the rest is story. But the biggest thing is the coming out of the Navy so young to do what I'm doing is unbelievable. And in other words, it's hard. Okay, today it's really a little hard to talk about my experience. But I was up on topside when the torpedoes hit. I was sleeping up there. No.
Go ahead.
Well, I was sleeping up there, and what we do is take a Levy blanket and make a little sleep bag out of it. Then we had to use that bag or have clothes for a pillow. That was the second night up there. Well, I was doing that. The night the torpedoes hit, Joe Jacobine and I had coffee at 11:45 because he had to go up on the 4 to 8 watch, up on 12 to 4 watch up on the bow at twin 20s. I had to relieve him at 4 o'clock, so he was supposed to wake me up at about 10 minutes to 4 to get there. What I'm saying is, I only lay down about 20 minutes. The ship blew up. And so, any more?
I mean, Dick, I think that you gave away the spoiler. I mean, I'm just kidding. I'm gonna have you go into detail about that in just a moment. But first, I want to talk to you about the bomb and the top secret mission that you and your crewmates were tasked with back.
Okay.
The message came in, I believe, July 6th or 15th to Captain McVeigh that he was ordered to Tinian Island with the contents of a crate and what looked like 2 ice cream canisters. And those were brought aboard your ship. But from what I understand, none of the crew knew what was in those. In fact, Captain McVeigh wasn't even told what was in those containers. And so there were 2 gentlemen who were undercover Army officers who came on board and they escorted this cargo. But other than them, nobody knew. And I believe, Jim, you have something you want to read for us, correct?
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I knew that my dad had told me many times that they had no idea what the cargo was. And every time any of the survivors have told the stories, they've reiterated that and made it very clear they had no idea. But by chance, I was going through, I mean, this is a good example of how you can find things 70 some years later, but I was going through a pile of papers and I found a photograph, one of these old Navy photographs that my dad, that was my dad, had sent home, and he wrote a note on the outside cover. It's hard to read, but I'll read it to you. But he wrote a note to his family, and what he said was, "To Mom and all the rest, with all my love, James." And then he wrote a note underneath that. He said, "The day before I go to sea." Now keep in mind, this is his first day going to sea. And he dated it 7/15/1945. The day before they load, well, that was the day actually that they loaded the bomb, wasn't it, Sarah?
That was the day they got the orders and they loaded it and left the 16th.
Yeah. So yeah, I was just, so I'm wondering from that note, Dick, so what did the guys think it was? What did the guys on the ship think that you guys were hauling?
We did, naturally, none of us had a clue. Well, there was a little joke going around. It was senatorial paper from MacArthur. But that's a joke. Anyhow, I seen the box being loaded, and they put it in a seaplane hangar. I stood muster every day about 15, 20 feet from the bomb. That's where I had to stand muster. And I was a deckhand in that seaplane hangar, little office on one side. So I was close to the bomb every day. And the mechanism of the bomb, I understand, was up in the officer's quarter, welded to the floor so it wouldn't shift around. In other words, a lot of people think because the bomb had it, if we were sunk, it would explode. Well, there's nothing like that. It wasn't assembled, put it that way.
It's amazing.
So,
Thanks for clearing that up too. I know there's a lot of misconception that the ship would have blown up if anything happened, but you're right, Dick. They were in 2 separate parts, and actually the crate on the deck was kind of a diversionary tactic. So everyone's attention would be at that, and no one would be looking at the uranium that was up in the officer quarters.
Yeah, a lot of guys thought the same thing. It'd be all one section, but it wasn't. Definitely wasn't. I didn't see it in the officer quarter, but I see the big bomb, and I heard it was apart. But there was Marines on it 24 hours a day, roped off. No one could touch it. Never anywhere near the rope as far as that goes. Everybody had their big ideas, but we never dreamed it was, we found out what it was, afterwards, of course. Yeah.
Well, and nobody knew what atomic warfare was at that time, right? That was not till later.
That's right. Oh, yeah. Atomic war was barely discussed.
And so I understand you loaded this up and then you headed out really quickly, right? You left we loaded the components at Hunter's Point, close to San Francisco, and then you set off to Pearl for refueling, and that's where your ship set a record. Isn't that right? That still stands today?
We set the record 9 days over there, and they tell me that's still in existence. For that size of ship, go that fast, that long. And a whole crew was asking, pardon my language, what the hell's our hurry? In other words, we got it 29 knots and left it there for 9 days. We just, we stopped at Pearl Harbor for just a few hours, I understand, to get fuel, and we had some customers we had to deliver there.
Mm-hmm. And I believe that at the exact same time when your ship left, there was a test being performed, a very important test being done in Manhattan, at the Manhattan Project in Alamogordo, New Mexico.
The test was the next day, I think it was.
Yeah. The same day you left, but nobody knew. Even Nolan and Furman, those two officers I mentioned earlier, who were protecting the components and were sent with it on your ship as guests, you could say, they didn't even know if the bomb worked. Nobody knew. It wasn't until you arrived at Tinian and offloaded the components that they were given a signal to be told that it even worked. So the bomb was sent with you, and that was before the testing took place. And then when it got in Tinian, they finally knew that they had a functioning atomic bomb, and that was the first time. And Truman was notified at that time too. So, everyone was kind of wondering if it would even work at that point.
Well, yeah, I was home on leave when President Roosevelt died, and April the 7th. So, and then of course Truman was one. And a lot of people criticized Truman for a little guy and everything, And not much experience of a president, but he made the big decision.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think that, I know that in the second part of this webinar, that's talked about quite a bit more extensively, but at this point, nobody knew what was going to be done. And I know that, after you had that high-speed run, you all were looking for a break because, 10 days at 32 knots was pretty hard on the crew. So I think that Captain was ready to train all you brand new green sailors. I think it was somewhere between 25% and 30% of the crew was brand new and really kind of green, or,
Real green.
What's that?
Real green.
Real green, yes. And McVeigh wanted to train him, but I also know that at Tinian, that's where most of the crew received mail for the first time too. And I think it's Earl Henry that had a pretty important, your father received a pretty important message or letter on that particular mail stop, right?
That's right. And there probably was a lot of mail that was received at Tinian, but the really special letter that my father received was from my mother. And in addition to what she wrote, she enclosed a photograph. And it was the only photograph that he ever saw of his baby Earl, of me. And it was a beautifully staged photo with my mother and me, the probably 4-week-old child at the time it was photographed, and a photo of my father next to us in his naval uniform. And when they left Tinian, he probably started that letter, but he mailed it when the Indianapolis arrived in Guam 2 days later. And the return letter showed that he was very enthusiastic about being a new father. And he wrote about how much he loved that photo. But he also, in the letter, sent something different. And it is a note to me on the back of his officer calling card. You may not be able to read this, but it's got his name, Earl Odell Henry, Lieutenant Commander, United States Naval Dental Corps. And on the back of it, he hand wrote this note. And it says, to Earl Jr., if I make as good a dad as your mother does a mother, son, you'll be okay. Love, Earl. And so this is probably one of the last things to leave the ship at its last port of call at Guam. And I am so blessed that my father sent that letter with this note that was his last opportunity to do so. So Sarah?
What a treasure that you have that letter and his handwriting. I mean, that's pretty special, Earl.
Yes, thank you.
And as Earl had mentioned, the ship had now gone to Guam, and that's where they were going to receive their next orders. They would refuel, and they were ready, and Captain McVeigh really wanted to get his crew trained up. And so he, received orders to report to the Philippines for training with Idaho. And he was also told that it was the backwater of war. There was nothing to worry about. He verbally requested an escort, but was told he didn't need it. Now, there was correspondence going on back and forth between intelligence agencies saying that they knew that there was trouble in those waters, but that information was never relayed to Captain McVeigh, nor to any member of the crew. So McVeigh he set out en route Petty. He was told to go at a leisurely speed of 15 knots, and that was on the morning of Tuesday, July 31st. He was able to choose whether or not to zigzag, which was a diversionary tactic for submarines against this force against submarines, so that you could evade the enemy. And that was up to his discretion. So I apologize. He left Saturday, July 28th, 1945 from Guam, ready to head to the Philippines. And Michael, I think you have something you want to read for us or share with us about that trip.
I sure do, Sarah. The first Indianapolis book that came out was in 1958, and it's called Abandoned Ship by Richard Newcomb. And I want to read a paragraph on page 64. On the bridge, the watch began to settle down. Jack Orr checked his course and speed. Casey Moore strolled around the open navigation bridge and found all watchstanders on duty. The moon was appearing more often now and was a little brighter, but at times it was difficult to make out faces on the bridge and impossible to see far out over the water. Just after midnight, the bugler of the watch, Donald F. Mack, went into the chart house to see the quartermaster, Jimmy French. French's striker, Seaman First Class, William F. Emery, was also in there. Suddenly, there was a tremendous blast forward, followed by a sheet of red-yellow flame and a giant column of water rising higher than the bridge. The ship shuddered, and a few seconds later came a second blast, much nearer the bridge, much more violent, louder, and more terrifying. For a split second after the second blast, there was utter silence, except for the swish of water and the hum of turbines. Now, Earl, why don't you tell us about where your father and namesake Lieutenant Commander Dr. Earl Henry was aboard the Indy when she was torpedoed?
I'm not 100% sure where my father was. The information that my mother and I received was from talking to the ship's two doctors, who were probably the closest men to my dad. Dr. Haynes' quarters was right across from where my father's sleeping quarters were. Dr. Haynes said that where my father's room was, that was just totally blown away. There wasn't anything there. So if he was sleeping there, he probably would have been killed immediately. Dr. Modisher, though, also said my father had a reputation for working during the nights on his projects in the dental lab, which was one of the few places on the ship that was air conditioned. It also was below the water level. So if that's where he was, he also probably would have died almost instantly. And that's all we really know about what happened. But my dad would have been killed as a result of that second torpedo that hit. So Jim, I think you have some information about the radio room.
Thanks, Earl. My dad told you was a radioman striker, and the radio shack on the ship is almost directly behind the number 2 turret on the starboard side, or the right side of the ship. So it's in the view at the bottom right of the slide there. You can see the ship and the gun turrets. Number 1 is forward, number 2 is the next one, and the radio shack is in that part of the superstructure directly behind the gun turret. So my dad's duty station was there. He got off duty or got off watch at about 11:30 p.m. and he went down below. Now Dad's from Abbeville, Alabama, and he's used to the heat and all of that. And here they were out in the South Pacific, and it was very hot that night. And he had been sleeping on the ship at that point, 10, 11, 12 days. So for the first time, he took advantage of the captain allowing them to sleep on deck because of the heat that particular night. So his first time ever deciding to sleep on deck. He went down below. If his quarters, the radioman's quarters, were down below the number 2 turret over on the starboard side. And he went down there and said it was just too hot, grabbed a blanket or something, some soft stuff, came back at the top side and decided to sleep right next to the number 2 turret on the starboard side, the side that you can see in the picture. He wasn't but 20 feet from the radio shack where he worked. And when the first torpedo hit, he said it threw him up. He had just fallen asleep, and he woke up immediately. And he said before he could even get on his feet, the second torpedo hit, threw him up in the air again. Now, if you notice, second torpedo is almost directly below him. He didn't know that. And he went to the radio shack immediately, radio 1. Now, Indianapolis has radio 1 forward and the radio 2 in the aft superstructure. Radio 1, he said, was just in shambles. He described it as the equipment laying all over the deck. The young guys were trying to just get it back up in the racks. And he said he remembered looking at the guys trying to warm up, get the transmitter transmitting, and noticed that there was no movement of the needles. In my dad's opinion, the radios in Radio 1 were out. And he said they stayed there until the water started coming over the bulkhead doorway on the starboard side as the ship listed on that side. And they were all ordered to get out of the radio shack, abandoned ship. They had been passed a message to transmit that they've been damaged, but he said in his opinion, Radio 1 was out. He was hoping Radio 2 was working. So that was my dad's story. It was pretty chaotic. He said it was, he walked off the ship, climbed all the way up to the port side, ship was on its side, and just walked off the ship. That was his experience. And to the day he died, I remember seeing the bottoms of his feet were still, they were like glass. They were all scar tissue. He was barefoot. So we know inside that ship was plenty hot. Dick, I think maybe you probably can tell us what was going on with you. I know your situation is very similar in that getting off the ship wasn't a problem because the ship kind of decided to solve that for you. So tell us a little bit about your experience with the torpedoes.
Well, I was sleeping topside, like I said, and I had to watch from 4 to 8 in the morning. Joe Jackamont, a good friend of mine, had to watch at 12 to 4 up the twin 20s up on the bow. So I was sleeping topside. We made that little sleeping bag. And it was the second night up there we were sleeping. So when the ship blew up, I laid down at about 10 minutes to 12, quarter to 12. The ship blew up at 10 after. I was sleeping. I went right to sleep. But when I know what the air quarter weighs, anyhow, when I stood up, the cable goes on the outside of the ship. I had a hold of that. In other words, I moved over probably about 12, 15 feet. Now, how I went in the air, I don't know. But by that time, I come down, and then me and I don't know how many, quite a few, 8, 10 guys said we're going aft to GQ, general quarters. We got to the quarter deck, was engulfed with flames. There was no way of passing through. So we went forward. By that time, the ship was kind of listed to the starboard side, and somebody had a knife, and they cut down, I think, 4 life jackets or life rafts on the 8-inch gun turrets. We threw them away, down, off. And then somebody we got to get a life jacket. Well, behind the guns, there were big canvas bags of life jackets. So he cut them down, and I got one. By that time, the ship was listed to the starboard side quite a bit. And in other words, you couldn't stand up. You just, more or less, I slid down probably 30, 40 feet and then hit the water. There were a lot of people asked me, where was you on the ship when you jumped off? I did not jump off the ship. The ship left me. So, in other words, that's the whole story. My part of it. But I was real lucky that I got away from the ship before it went down. I talked to survivors different times later after, and the last plunge of the ship went down real slow. There was no air pockets. It bounced up or down like a ball, and as the compartments were blowing apart, it went down real slow. So there was no very little section of the ship. But probably I was only probably 50 feet, 60 feet away. So I didn't feel anything. So I was lucked out in that part. Of course, the bad part about it, the waves are about 12, 15 foot high at my first night. So other than that, that's my side of the story.
Thank you for sharing that, Dick. I know everything that led up to that moment and what resulted next was truly a perfect storm of things going wrong. On land, your sinking went unnoticed. Your ship disappeared in 12 minutes and nobody in command, nobody in any of the bases knew the Indianapolis was gone. Between, several mishaps with communications that went wrong, where they were headed, it wasn't received. The ship they were supposed to report to received a garbled message and it was dismissed. And then, an act of insubordination, it was never reported that you didn't show up. So all these things contributed to the ship going, being lost and nobody knowing that it had happened. What's that, Dick?
I talked to a group in the water, 4 or 5 on let me see, it'd be Wednesday afternoon, the sun was going down. And one guy said, he said, well, they're not looking for us Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. They're not looking for us. So we said to ourselves, this is it. Little story behind.
I'm glad you kept fighting.
Oh, yeah.
I'm glad you're so stubborn. But, it was determined that roughly 300 men went down with the initial blast and with the sinking. Beyond that, there was approximately 100 men who survived, but with severe injuries, and they probably lasted till morning before too much pain, too much, blood loss and whatnot, and then they were lost. And, I know that we'll go into this more, but, you all, I don't think any of us here can even comprehend what you faced and what your shipmates faced between dehydration, between facing injuries, between, overexposure, exhaustion, hallucinations, and then even turning on each other. It's hard to imagine what that would be like or what any one of us would do in that situation. We all hope for the best. We hope we'd be heroes, but it actually seemed like there were very few that were heroes, but they were great heroes like Captain Park, like Father Conway, these men who really did everything they could through their dying breath to help others. And so, the thing that always stands out about this story, and the thing that most of the public knows it for, is the sharks. And, we won't really get into those details today about the sharks, but that's really what drew popular attention. And that's what led Spielberg to essentially make the movie. Well, he made the movie Jaws, and it's that monologue by the character Quint that brought Indianapolis to the world's attention. And I know I've spoken with your son, Dave, quite a few times, and he tells the story about how he was so shocked to find out that you were on the ship when that happened, right? I mean, when he went and saw Jaws and he came home and found out you were on the ship, he couldn't believe it, right? Is that how the story goes?
That's right. Well, I didn't tell anybody. Well, wife and I got married in 51. In 58, the first book came out, Abandoned Ship. Of course, we got it and read it. That's the first time that Joanne knew I was on a ship that sank. She didn't know the name of the ship. In other words, I didn't tell nobody nothing. So,
I can't believe that's part of the greatest generation. You all held that in for so long. And I know that some of your shipmates started talking about it, and there was quite a few books like Abandoned Ship that had been written over the years and documentaries. And the one book I really want to talk about today is your book, Dick, and your shipmates book, the survivors book. Only 316 survived. It used to be called 317 survived, but then when the number was corrected, we updated it. And so, you know, this book is really phenomenal because it gives those of us who were not there insight into, or a glimpse into what it might have been like to experience World War II, to experience the sinking, and you know, that the tragedy from those who lived it. It's in their own words. And so I encourage you all to go and check out that book. It's available on Kindle right now. 100% of the proceeds go to keeping it in print and eventually doing a reprint with the updated versions. And so if you're a family member out there of a survivor and your loved one's story is not in there, please contact us at our email so that we can include them in future updates. But this is really an incredible story. And I know, Dick, your chapter in there is great. And I think you earned the title of like most copies sold or something like that.
I saw quite a few of them. It's unbelievable. When that word got out, quite a few 10 years ago, when they came out. For example, I get a talk at aircraft, helicopter. I get it right. Out here at Grand Ledge, they have a big base out there. And at one time they asked me to give a talk out there, so I showed them this book, and they so the big shot, I said, "Well, you're bringing about 100 books along, you'll sell them." I said, "You're kidding." I sold 97 in one day.
How many?
One day, one afternoon. There was about 750 people there.
Wow.
And I'm not trying to go too long, but I can tell you so many different situations about selling the books, how it was presented, and different things.
Now, Jim, I know that your father had a chapter in the book too that was added in, and he goes into his experiences like we've talked about, but also his time in the water. And I wanted to ask you about that, to share what he shared with you about his experience.
Great. Yeah, there's like two different versions of what happened to Dad in the water, because I learned he told me a little bit. He very seldom talked about time in the water. He talked about getting off the ship, and then he talked about climbing onto the Ringness, but he never, ever, very seldom talked about his time in the water. But what little he did, I stitched together after he passed for the book, because they wanted something to tell his story. So I just recounted what he told me. A couple of years later, I was talking to Glenn Morgan. Dad passed in 2001. The book came out that year. And I was talking to him about how little I really knew about Dad's time in the water. And Glenn recalled that my dad was on the rafts with him. Now, keep in mind, my dad never said he was on a raft, which opened a whole nother can of questions I had and a lot of research. But in talking to Glenn, who helped me so much, he and Lindsay Wilcox found a list of the 20 men that were in 4 rafts that were picked up by the Ringness. And the Ringness, of course, is the ship that picked up Captain McVeigh. So that's what everybody knows about the Ringness, but I've always been focused on these 4 rafts. On the 4 rafts, Lieutenant Freeze was one of those sailors you were talking about, Sarah, that was injured so bad that he didn't survive. But the other 19 did, and that amazed me, and that's when Glenn shared this story with me. He told me that my dad had opened up the emergency fishing kit that was on the raft, one of the rafts, and started catching fish in that little corner area between the 4 rafts. And he started out by catching a tiny little purple fish, and then he dip netted that, and then he put it on a hook, and eventually he started catching fish big enough for all the guys to eat. And that was what Glenn told me sustained these guys for the last 2 or 3 days that they were in the rafts. So I'm so glad that I was able to discover that story, and Glenn was able to recall all that. But even more so, it opened questions of why Dad didn't tell me that part. And through talking to survivors and Glenn, I found out over the years that the guys who were in the rafts felt lucky. They felt like they had it too easy compared to the guys in the jackets like Dick. So the guys in the rafts shut up when they got rescued and never really talked about their time in the water because they felt like their time was easy. So that's my dad's story, and it kind of gives you a little bit of insight into what it must have been like in the water, because he just never really wanted to talk about it. Dick, I know you had a lot of water stories. You had a couple of water stories. I know you had a few. We don't want to talk about after that, but what was it like for you in the water? What kinds of things happened to you?
Well, first, of course, you're in a pretty good sized group. Of course, you really didn't know for sure because it was midnight, and real dark until, 8 hours or so later. And then you find out how many people are around you and everything. And that's when Father Conway came in sometime that Monday morning to give me the last sacraments. And I never last I seen of him. And there was quite a group in that room. But of course, found out later there's currents out there. So we're scattered 2 miles wide by 14, 15 miles long. It's hard to believe that in a period of time, you'd pass out in kind of a sleep mode or pass out. In other words, and when you wake up or come to, there's only 4 or 5 guys around you. But when you pass out, there was 8 or 10. In other words, they'd come and go, put it that way. Of course, part of it, I see men take their life jackets off and say they're going down below to get a drink of water. Well, if you drink too much salt water on an empty stomach, your eyeballs pop out, your ears and everything else, and foam comes to your mouth, and in other words, it kills you. You go out of your head in about 2 hours. So quite a few guys went that way. But I tried to talk some of them into it, but it didn't work. And another story is when they dropped us rafts, they probably 50 yards from me. And there were 4 of us. A good friend of mine, Robert Terry, was with me. And another guy, 2, I didn't know him. Anyhow, we decided to swim to that raft. Well, I was the only one made it. The 2 guys were heart stopped along the way, and I shook them. And Terry was taken by a shark. When I got to the raft, there was 5 or 6, 7, I can't tell you, on the raft. They were too weak or didn't have enough strength or whatever to get me on the raft. And I couldn't get on the raft, so I tied myself to the raft. That's where I stayed till Friday morning. This is Thursday afternoon. So in other words, I couldn't get on the raft.
Wow.
I stayed with the raft, and then they picked me up with the rest of them. So, little story.
That's amazing. Well, Sarah, tell us a little bit about the survival.
Oh, okay.
No, Sarah. Sarah can tell us a little bit about the kinds of things they were facing in the water. Anyway.
Sarah.
She went home.
I myself and didn't even know it.
Okay.
I was trying to tell myself to be quiet and hurry up.
Me too.
But there were so many things beyond what the ship was famous for and what the story was famous for, which is the sharks. But the dehydration, it led to hyponatremia, which is the swelling of the brain, hallucinations. Also, you have to remember the men in the water a lot of them were covered in thick oil. And so it was very hard to breathe. And, L.D. Cox, one of the survivors, talked about how every time he would drive over fresh pavement being paved, it would take him right back to that, because that was what that smell was like to him. And so when the ship was sinking, in order to try to ballast it, they released all the oil into the water. So that covered the men swimming. And so they were kind of disguised. They couldn't tell each other apart. And remember, a lot of the men were very new to the ship and didn't know each other. So covered in oil, they're hallucinating. Imagine at this point, they really are having a hard time identifying each other, and they're not in their right mind. They started turning on each other. And there were a lot of fights. There was, the men were spread out by the last day over 25 miles. And so they were broken up into different groups, as you mentioned, Jim. Your father was on a raft. Some men had nothing but, flotsam to float on, like ammunition cans. They had life jackets, these K-POC life jackets that were rated for 48 hours. And, by the time they were rescued, it was over 100 hours in the water. So some of these men were pulled out and the jacket would sink. And so they were holding the jackets up. So they were dealing with all of this, the sharks, the dehydration, the hallucinations, and in the middle of the ocean. I mean, they're 300 miles from the closest land. So it's not like they can just swim somewhere. I know, Jim, you kind of joke, Dick, you kind of joke about it, but the closest land was 4 miles straight down. And and so you couldn't swim to a safe place. And there weren't rafts. There were 12 rafts and very few men got on them. And so it really was a horrendous situation, that it is a miracle that even the 320 men who were rescued were able to live through what they lived through. Unfortunately, 4 of those men passed away, and there were only 316 who ultimately survived. But I'm absolutely in awe, Dick, that you and your crew and those who did survive were able to in those conditions. So thank you for being stubborn.
Now, another thing, I kind of add to a little bit, but you're talking about sharks and diesel. I understand later that sharks cannot tolerate smell of diesel fuel. And I was saturated with it, and I had this happen 4 or 5 times. I kind of unconscious mode, and I felt something keep poking me in my life jacket. Well, that was the nose of the shark. But I was told later why he didn't take me, because I was saturated with that diesel fuel, and they couldn't stand the smell of diesel fuel. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
I guess that was good. That, and it worked as sunblock too, right? It kind of kept the sun from your skin.
Amazing.
Well, I know that it's time for us to take some questions from the audience. And so if you have questions, you can type them to us on the chat or the Q&A. I think the bubble down at the bottom of your screen, and we'll direct them to whomever is the best person to answer. So let's hear some of those questions.
Yeah.
We're still
We need I'm not sure whether people are coming in on Q&A or chat. I can see them both.
well, I don't understand.
So if anybody's got any questions, please bring them up.
Well, I have one for Dick while we're waiting, and then
Sure.
I know that we'll give people a chance to ask some questions, but
That'd be great.
I think, when you talk to students all over the country and share your story, can you share with us one of the most important lessons you want students and adults to take away from your story? What can they learn from you?
Oh, okay. All right. The lessons from my father. I go around and talk a lot, and my dad had to sign for me to go in the Navy. In December, I went to the Navy in January. My birthday was in March, and I was 18 years in boot camp. But he had to sign for me. When he took me back to the railroad station after boot camp, he shook my hand real firmly and gave me a look. He said, "Dad, I want you home, Dick." I said, "You probably know, in Europe, in April, the war was winding down. Don't worry about that. The war is putting it over." Every time I was ready to give up, I see my dad's face there, and I felt his grip. I told him when he got home, he brought me home.
Amazing. I know all the guys. So you always wonder, Sara, and what would it take for somebody? What do you have to hang on to endure all of that and more? And I know many of the guys have said over and over, and I know Dick said it too. It was easier to die than it was to stay alive. And I know Ed Harrell says that often as well. So we do have a question from Bob Dollins about the radio men on board. He wanted to know if any of the surviving radio men make it to the Indy reunions. I know Dad used to, as a radioman striker, would get together with those guys. They were always curious whether a message had gotten out, and many of them would get messages from other sailors in the Pacific saying, "We heard," but of course, as Sara and research has shown, there's no real documented, proven receipt of a message that the Navy could have responded to. I know my dad, to the day he died, believed that they got a message out of radio too, but you know, that's a bunch of hopeful guys 70-some years later. Dick, did you actually get to talk to any of the radiomen at any of the reunions? I know they came because I used to see them around.
I was thinking about the guy, I can't remember his name. He lived outside of Chicago. He was a radio man. He came to a lot of our reunions. I can't think of his name right offhand.
Jack Miner was it Jack
there you
Miner?
go. There it is.
Yeah, he was a radio tech.
Yes, I talked to him. Oh God, many times.
Right. If I remember correctly, Jack was in radio too as well. So he was probably where they had a functioning radio. Do you remember whether or not that's true, Sara?
He believes to this day, of course he's dead now, that somebody received our messages. There was an SOS message that got off. He said that in our reunions.
Yeah, understand that they did send. The question is whether there was enough power for it to transmit. There's no record whatsoever of receipt of any kind of SOS transmission, but the men do, you know, they did everything in their power to get that message off. And
Radio 1 was on emergency power. They know that, and Radio 2 as well. The whole ship had lost communication, so they had severe problems. And getting a message off is, when you've got no escort, getting a message off is your lifeline. So they knew that. The radiomen knew that. They did get a message and permission to send. So they were transmitting as best they could, but whether or not the equipment held up and there was power enough to do it always remains in question. So, Dick, we do have a question here for you. It says, what were the daily duties like for you on the ship? What did you do on an average day? What did you do on an average day on the ship?
Well, it's a 4-hour on duty and 8 hours off. That's about taking care of it. In other words,
what did you do, though? Tell us what you did during those 4 hours.
Yeah. Besides drink coffee, what were you doing?
I would be up on the twin 20s, up on the bow. Let's say from 12 o'clock to 4. Then I'd be off 8 hours. Another 8 hours later, I had the same place again. In other words, you're on 4 hours, 8 off. That kept you busy all day.
Yeah.
No.
What would you do with the 8 hours?
No.
Well, we have a question for you. Tell us about that painting over your shoulder that's behind you.
Well, that's a painting that my father did aboard ship. It's a reproduction of an original painted on the ship in August of 1944, the first month he was on the ship. It's full of symbolism. I used to say I thought he was expressing the emotions of the crew that were on the ship, really of all the Americans fighting in the Pacific. Another way to look at it is, it's the American bald eagle protecting an American bald eagle that has a snake that's dripping blood in its talons, and tied to the tail of the snake is a tiny tattered Japanese flag. So again, it's just full of symbolism. And I think Admiral Mackey may have asked that question. Admiral Mackey, I do believe I gave you one of those prints when you were the keynote speaker at the Survivors Reunion just a few years ago.
Thank you. And Michael, a question came up for you about your uncle and what you've pieced together about his story. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, as we were preparing this webinar, I brought this up about Vincent Allard, who was a survivor, who was the last person to see William Flint Emery alive. And it was interviews done at the survivors' hospitals. So perhaps that can be a tease to the next webinar, since we're going to be talking about survivors, or something that can be shared here. But just to briefly share that my grandfather, being in the Navy, sent a couple of his naval colleagues to the survivors' hospitals to try to find any information, and got quite a story. So perhaps that can be teased for the next webinar, or I can share it now, whatever's best.
Jim, what do you think?
We got a question here for Dick. Dick, did you know a Winston Cooper Mitchell by any chance? Winston Cooper Mitchell. This is a question for, yeah.
Jerry Mitchell, he lived right close to me when I was a kid. When I was 8, he's 18 years old, he moved to a different part of town. And myself and the man across the street were joining the Navy the same day. And here comes Jerry, same day. I knew him. Anyhow, he joined the Navy with me. We went all the way through together. We went to boot camp, and he died about 8, 9 years ago now.
Okay.
I knew him well, yes.
Yeah, I'm sure you did.
We have another question for Dick too. Dick, your ship was found in 2017. Can you tell us a little bit about what that meant to you?
Okay, I didn't understand, no.
When Indianapolis was located in 2017 and you'd heard the news that they found your ship. Tell me about that.
Well, we went, you there, Sarah. We went to New York City, remember that?
I was sitting there.
and the man was real good there. To me, I said, I think we're on camera too. In other words, I'm glad they found it and they located it. And now this is a closed story. In other words, that's what people were looking for, the location. And people ask me, what are they going to do with the location? Well, they think they're going down and get some stuff. No, they can't touch it. Besides, 3.5 miles deep is pretty deep, as far as that goes. So I went down. Yeah, I think it was good. Sarah, the funny part about it, they called us in New York City. The man was here to talk to my house. And 2 days later, he called. He asked me and he asked David, we come to New York City. And 2 days later, we're on a plane going to New York City for that show.
Well, we could talk for hours just on that day, Sarah, and what it was like to get that message that the ship was found. I often tell people it's the first time in my lifetime. I'm 64 years old now, and it's the first time in my lifetime I've ever felt tremendous happiness and tremendous grief instantaneously. I don't even know how to describe that feeling. It was very, very complex. And I know, Earl, you had a very similar experience when you got the news. Is that right?
I had always downplayed the significance that it would have to me when the ship was found. After all, it's not like bringing the men back alive. And when I heard the news, and it was from Sarah early in the morning, 2 hours even earlier for her in California, and I just started bawling. And it caught me off guard. I didn't expect to react like that. I was asking myself, why am I crying? But I couldn't help it. It's a moment I'll never forget.
I know, Michael, you must have had a similar feeling.
Oh my goodness. Well, the morning started by looking at my cell phone, and Jim, you had called me, and your voicemail was such an emotional voicemail. You were crying, talking about LAS lost sea families. And I'm like, oh my God, what's wrong with my brother, Jim? Second phone call from Miss Sara Vladic. Said, Michael, don't turn on the TV, don't turn on the radio, don't go on social media, call me immediately. I called Sarah, and she told me that in a certain amount of minutes, the United States Navy is going to release the news that the USS Indianapolis, your uncle namesake ship, has been found. and I literally dropped the phone. I was overwhelmed with emotion. I was just in a fog, called my mom later that day, burst out crying. So I ran away up to Southport Island, Boothby Harbor region of Maine. I did a couple local media interviews. One I got through fine. The other one photojournalists asked me to read some of the items that my uncle's last letter, the missing in action, Western Union telegram, and I just burst out crying. So it's just so much emotion that we all feel, survivors, lost sea family, rescue recovery crew, and it's emotion we continue to feel to this day.
Yeah, I got my notice from Lieutenant Commander, or Lieutenant Commander at that time, from Captain Bill Tody. He called me that was early in the morning, and I was with my nephew. My dad had two brothers that were in the Navy and also retired. So I just happened to be with one of his brother's children. And I think he had no idea, well, what kind of phone call did I just get? Because it was so many mixed emotions, exactly what you guys are saying. To this day, I still can't sort them out, but I know it was days before I could even talk about it. It was bizarre, very tough time. So we got another question for Dick. My father was aviation machinist mate Anthony Mayday. He maintained the recon planes in the hangar bay. Did Dick know my father?
No.
No. You know who might have known him? Jim Jarvis would have known him.
See, that was the first trip out for me. The only ones I got to know at all is that my crew, my gunner's crew, and my should watch with different, probably 12, 15 men, maybe. You know what I'm saying? In other words, you didn't get acquainted with. I got acquainted with a lot of them at the reunion, of course. You know, after that, we got different reasons, and this is why that reunion is such a godsend. That's what I call it. When went through.
Yeah. Sarah, there's a good question for you. This is one that comes up at every reunion when people first meet you. How did you become involved with keeping these stories alive? Because we're still wondering too.
How am I here? Do you know this summer marks the 20th anniversary of my first reunion? Jeez.
Amazing. You've grown up with us.
I have. You're my family, and I'll keep it short. I know we're wrapping up and we're out of time, but honestly, I was intrigued by the story as a kid, and I was invited to my first reunion in 2001 by Paul and Mary Lou Murphy. And, you know, all my friends had heroes and posters of all these movie celebrities, and I had the Indy ship on my wall. And so I was that kid, and I was just fascinated in meeting Dick and your shipmates and just the crew of Indianapolis. These men were my heroes, and to actually believe that they would allow me to come and spend time with them, I think I just sat there and stared in awe the first reunion. And that evolved into wanting to tell their story, and I'd always wanted to tell it as a movie and still gonna do it as a movie. And so you all have kept me around forever, and you know that's kind of the really short version of the story. But 20 years later, I've been blessed and privileged to be part of this journey, and I just want to keep this story alive and make sure the next generation really knows what's important. And I think that's critical right now. So I'll keep fighting the good fight and do what I can to help you all keep the story alive.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And we certainly, all of us, all the families, we certainly all appreciate what you've done and what you're going to do. You're stuck with us for the rest of your life, you know that. So, Dick, do you have any parting words? I need to wrap this up so we can, some people asked about the question and answer session. If you have any questions, go ahead and send them in. We will answer them in writing to you. We're gonna get together powwow later on, so you'll get an answer in the coming days. But yeah, do send in your questions from this. One viewer said that their broadcast cut out in the middle and so on. So yes, we are recording this, and it will be rebroadcast later. It'll be available actually for you to watch at your leisure. So
on YouTube.
Dick, did you have any parting words before I give everybody the heave ho and Got some announcements we have to make at the end, but
Oh, my favorite thing, I started up, never give up.
never give up.
Never, I'm so proud of those words that, and I have two daughters, but I really, that's the way, not just I live, that's the way all of us live, never give up.
Yeah. Well, you've created a whole generation of
Everybody
very,
give up so easy. Be easier, okay, my opinion, it'd be easier to die out there than to stay alive. You had to really work at it. I mean, really work at it. So,
yeah, I was going to say it, you all the survivors have created a generation of children that are, you say never give up. Everybody else just says we're stubborn.
yeah.
So, all right, with that, I need to close this out. Please visit our USSIndianapolis.com website to discover the new educational material that's being added that will help us all do our part for the crew and the rescuers of USS Indianapolis by helping them tell their story to future generations. Check out the USS Indianapolis Self-Study Learning Module that was created by the education branch of the Legacy Organization. It's a self-paced learning tool designed to bring the Indy story to individuals, classrooms, or any group or organization. Just go check it out. And for fun and knowledge, look for the new study assignments, the crossword puzzles, word search, they're all Indy related, and other great fun learning devices we're adding to the website. Remember the website, www.ussindianapolis.com. And last but not least, check the website for any questions not addressed in the broadcast. We'll be answering them all. So so if your question didn't make the live broadcast, be sure to go there and for a response and see other good questions that we could not get to during the live broadcast. Also, on behalf of the USS Indianapolis CA-35 Legacy Organization, www.ussindianapolis.com, and our honored guests, Michael Emery, Earl Henry Jr., Sara Vladic, and survivor Dick Thelen, and all our behind the scenes Indy family who put this presentation together, the entire crew and all the rescuers of the USS Indianapolis and myself, we thank you for tuning into this program, Never Give Up, USS Indianapolis Part 1. Please be sure to mark your calendars for Never Give Up, USS Indianapolis Part 2. That webinar will be on Thursday, March 18th, 2021 at 7 p.m. same time, Eastern time, 4 p.m. Pacific. That's 2 weeks from tonight, March 18th, 7 p.m., 4 p.m. Pacific. Be sure and put that on your calendar now or you'll forget. We'll also be announcing it just before at the website. And if you or a friend missed one or either of these webinars, you can go to the USS Indianapolis website in 4 or 5 days from today and watch the recorded program. So with that, on behalf of our entire crew here, I want to thank everybody for tuning in and please have a good evening. Thank you. Bye.